a pie, a promise, and a place called home. In a frontier town where hunger was never about food, a widow's last pie became the first taste of belonging a lonely rancher ever knew. If you've ever been judged before anyone knew your story, this one's for you. Stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Let's begin. The cold came early to Ridgefield that December. It wasn't the kind of cold that made you pull your coat tighter or hurry inside for warmth. It was the kind that settled into your bones and made a home there, quiet and relentless, until you forgot what it felt like to be warm at all. The kind of cold that had nothing to do with snow. Elena Hart knew that cold well. She stood at the small wooden counter in the corner room she rented above the mercantile, her hands dusted white with flour, her fingers working the dough with the kind of practiced rhythm that didn't require thought anymore. The room smelled like butter and cinnamon, like something worth remembering. Outside the frosted window, the town square buzzed with preparation, garlands strung between storefronts, shopkeepers arranging their wares, families bundling their children against the wind. Christmas was coming. Elena didn't feel it. Behind her, curled on the narrow bed beneath a patchwork quilt that had seen better years, her daughter Mia watched with wide, hopeful eyes. 5 years old, all dark curls and stubborn optimism, she clutched a worn cloth doll and whispered plans into its stitched ear. "Mama says if we sell all the pies tomorrow, we can stay," Mia murmured to the doll, her voice carrying the kind of certainty only children possess. "And then maybe we can get a tree. A small one. Just for us." Elena's hand stilled for just a moment. She didn't turn around. She couldn't let Mia see the doubt that lived in her eyes these days, the weight of promises she wasn't sure she could keep. "That's right, sweet girl," Elena said softly, her voice steady even as her heart felt anything but. "We'll do our very best." Mia nodded, satisfied, and returned to whispering her plans. Elena turned back to the dough, pressing her palms into it harder than necessary. The motion grounded her, kept her present, kept her from thinking too far ahead, to the rent she didn't have, to the landlady's narrowed eyes, to the 4 days she had left before. A sharp knock rattled the thin door. Elena flinched. Mia sat up straighter, clutching her doll. "Mrs. Hart!" The voice was clipped, impatient. "Mrs. Calloway, the landlady." "A word, if you please." Elena wiped her hands on her apron, glanced back at Mia, who had gone very still, very quiet, and crossed the small room. She opened the door just enough to meet the older woman's sharp gaze. Mrs. Calloway stood with her arms folded, her mouth set in a line that had no give in it. She didn't wait for an invitation. "I'll be blunt, Mrs. Hart. It's the 21st. Rent was due on the 15th. "I know," Elena said quietly. "I'm working on it. The Christmas market tomorrow." "The market." Mrs. Calloway's tone made it clear what she thought of that plan. "You've been to 3 markets this month. How much did you bring in?" Elena's jaw tightened. "Enough to buy supplies. Enough to keep trying. Not enough to pay me." The words hung between them, cold and factual. Mrs. Calloway sighed, and for a brief moment, something almost like pity flickered across her face. But pity didn't pay bills, and they both knew it. "I have other families asking about this room," the landlady said, softer now but no less firm. "Good families. Families that can pay on time." Elena's throat tightened. "I understand. I just need a few more days." "You have until Christmas Eve. 4 days." Mrs. Calloway glanced past Elena into the room, her gaze landing briefly on Mia, who was pretending very hard not to listen. "After that, I'll need the room cleared." She didn't wait for a response. She turned and descended the narrow stairs, her footsteps echoing long after she disappeared. Elena stood in the doorway, her hand still on the knob, her chest tight. 4 days. She closed the door gently and turned back to face her daughter. Mia's eyes were too big, too knowing. "Mama?" Elena crossed the room and knelt beside the bed, smoothing a hand over Mia's curls. "It's all right, sweetheart. We're going to be just fine." "Are we leaving?" The question was small, barely a whisper. Elena's heart cracked just a little more. "No," she said, forcing her voice to stay calm, to stay sure. "We're not leaving. We're going to sell every single pie tomorrow, and we're going to stay right here. I promise." Mia searched her mother's face, looking for the truth beneath the words. Whatever she found seemed to satisfy her, because she nodded and nestled back into the quilt. "Okay, Mama." Elena stood, her legs shaky, and returned to the counter. She stared down at the dough, at the half-formed crusts waiting to be filled, at the meager supplies she'd stretched as far as they would go. A promise. She'd made her daughter a promise, and she had 4 days to keep it. Dank. The next morning arrived cold and bright, the kind of December day that made everything look cleaner than it was. The town square had transformed overnight into something almost magical. Stalls draped in evergreen boughs, ribbons fluttering in the breeze, the smell of roasted chestnuts and spiced cider drifting through the crisp air. Elena arrived early, before most of the vendors, pulling a small wooden cart loaded with pies. Apple, berry, spiced pumpkin, cookies dusted with sugar, tarts filled with preserves she'd made herself back when there had been time for such things. Mia walked beside her, bundled in a coat 2 sizes too big, her mittened hands gripping the edge of the cart to help pull. "Where should we set up, Mama?" she asked, her breath misting in the cold. Elena scanned the square. Most of the prime spots were already claimed, corner positions near the main road, spaces close to the church steps where families would gather after service. What remained were the edges, the places people passed without really seeing. "There," Elena said, pointing to a spot near the old oak tree at the square's far end. Not ideal, but it would have to do. They set up quickly, arranging the pies on a cloth-covered table, positioning the cookies in neat rows. Elena had even managed to tie red ribbons around a few of the smaller packages, a touch of festivity she hoped might catch someone's eye. Mia stood beside the table, her face bright with hope, ready to greet the first customers. But the first customers didn't stop. Neither did the second, or the third. Families strolled past, glancing at the table and then away, their gazes sliding over Elena and Mia as if they were part of the scenery. A few women whispered to each other as they passed, their eyes lingering on Elena's worn coat, on the way her hands trembled slightly in the cold. "Charity case," one of them murmured, just loud enough to be heard. Elena kept her chin up, her expression neutral. She'd heard worse. Mia, oblivious to the cruelty, stepped forward and held out a small sugar cookie. "Would you like to try one? My mama made them. They're really good." The woman didn't even slow down. "No, thank you, dear." Mia's face fell, but only for a moment. She turned to the next person and the next, offering samples with the kind of stubborn persistence that came naturally to children who hadn't yet learned to give up. An hour passed. Then 2. The square grew busier, louder, filled with laughter and music and the hum of commerce. All around them, vendors called out their wares, coins exchanged hands, packages wrapped in brown paper disappeared into shopping baskets. Elena's table remained untouched. She could feel the weight of judgment settling over her like a heavy cloak. She knew what they saw when they looked at her: a widow, a woman alone, someone who had fallen on hard times and refused to disappear quietly, someone who didn't belong. Mia's voice had grown hoarse from calling out, but she kept trying, her small hand outstretched with another cookie, another smile that was starting to waver at the edges. "Please, mister? Just one bite?" The man walked past without a word. Elena's hands curled into fists beneath the table. She wanted to scream at them, to demand they stop judging her without knowing a single true thing about her life. But she didn't. She never did. She just stood there, silent and still, and let the cold sink deeper. Across the square, leaning against the post outside the feed store, Caleb Rowan watched. He wasn't a man who came to town often. Didn't like crowds, didn't care for small talk, or the kind of shallow pleasantries people traded like currency in places like this. But he'd needed supplies, and he'd figured he'd get in and get out before the market drew too many people. He hadn't planned to stay. But something made him stop. A little girl, dark curls escaping from beneath a knit cap, mittened hands holding out cookies to strangers who wouldn't even look at her. She kept smiling, kept trying, even as person after person walked past without a word. Caleb's jaw tightened. He recognized that kind of determination, the kind that came from necessity, from a world that had already taught you that no one was coming to save you, the kind that belonged on a battlefield, not in the hands of a 5-year-old. His gaze shifted to the woman behind the table. She stood with her hands folded in front of her, her posture straight despite the exhaustion written across her face. Pretty, in a quiet way. The kind of pretty that didn't demand attention but lingered in your memory anyway. Dark hair pulled back, tired eyes that held too much, a set to her mouth that suggested she was holding herself together through sheer force of will. Caleb knew that look too. He watched as another group of women approached, glanced at the table, and turned away without stopping. One of them whispered something that made the others laugh, sharp, cutting laughter that had nothing kind in it. The woman at the table didn't react, didn't flinch, just stood there, enduring. But the little girl heard. Her face crumpled for just a second before she forced the smile back into place, held out another cookie to the next passerby. Caleb's chest tightened. He told himself he was done getting involved in other people's problems, told himself that solitude was safer, that keeping his distance meant fewer chances to lose something that mattered. But watching that child's stubborn hope crack at the edges, he pushed off the post and started walking. Mia saw him coming first. A tall man, broad-shouldered and weathered, moving through the crowd with the kind of presence that made people step aside without realizing they were doing it. He wore a heavy coat, dark hat pulled low, and his expression gave nothing away. But he was walking toward their table. Mia's face lit up. "Mama, look!" Elena followed her daughter's gaze and felt her breath catch slightly. The man approaching wasn't like the others who'd passed by. There was something different in the way he moved, purposeful and unhurried, like he'd already decided something before he arrived. He stopped in front of the table. Up close, Elena could see the lines around his eyes, the silver threading through dark hair at his temples, the scar that cut a faint line along his jaw. He looked like a man who'd seen hard years and survived them, but only barely. His gaze swept over the table, over the pies, the cookies, the carefully tied ribbons, and then settled on Mia. "You've been working hard," he said, his voice low and gravelly, but not unkind. Mia beamed. "Yes, sir. My mama made everything. Would you like to try a cookie?" She held one out, and to Elena's surprise, the man took it. He studied it for a moment, turning it over in his broad, calloused hand, and then took a bite. The square seemed to go quiet. Caleb Rowan had forgotten what good food tasted like. He'd forgotten what it felt like to taste something made with care, with attention, with the kind of patience that suggested the person who made it actually gave a damn. The cookie was perfect, buttery and sweet, with just the right amount of spice. It tasted like warmth, like home, like something he hadn't known he was missing. He chewed slowly, and when he swallowed, he looked down at the little girl, whose eyes were wide and hopeful. "That," he said quietly, "is the best cookie I've had in 10 years. Mia's entire face lit up like sunrise. "Really? Really?" She spun toward her mother, practically vibrating with excitement. "Mama, he likes it." Elena's throat tightened. She met the man's gaze, and something passed between them. An understanding, maybe. Or just the shared recognition of what it felt like to be seen when everyone else had decided you were invisible. "Thank you," she said softly. Caleb nodded. Then he turned his attention back to the table, studying the pies arranged there. "How much for everything?" Elena blinked. "I'm sorry?" "Everything on this table. How much?" She stared at him, certain she'd misheard. You want to buy all of it?" "That's what I said." "But—" She glanced at the pies, at the dozens of cookies, at the sheer quantity of food spread before them. "That's far too much for one person." "I have ranch hands," Caleb said simply, "and Christmas is coming. Seems like a good time to feed people something worth eating." Elena's hands trembled slightly. She folded them together to still them. I don't know what to say." "Yes or no works." A laugh bubbled up, unexpected and slightly breathless. "Yes, of course. Yes." Caleb pulled a leather pouch from his coat and counted out bills, more than Elena had hoped to make in a week, let alone a single morning. He set the money on the table, his expression unreadable. "I'll need more," he added. 3 pies a week through January, maybe February, depending." Elena's heart hammered in her chest. "I can do that. Absolutely." "Good. He tipped his hat slightly. I'll send someone to pick this up in an hour. That work for you? Yes. Thank you. Truly. He nodded once, started to turn away, then paused. His gaze dropped to Mia, who was watching him like he'd just handed her the moon. You did good, kid, he said quietly. Keep that stubbornness. World tries to beat it out of people. Don't let it. Mia nodded solemnly, clutching her doll. Caleb Rowan walked away without another word, disappearing back into the crowd. Elena stood frozen for a long moment, staring at the money on the table, at the empty space where the stranger had stood. Mia tugged on her sleeve. Mama? Are we going to be okay now? Elena looked down at her daughter, at the hope shining in her eyes, at the trust she placed so freely in a world that had given her so little reason to. Yes, sweetheart, Elena whispered, pulling Mia close. I think we're going to be just fine. But even as she said it, a new fear settled in her chest, because now she had to deliver. That night, Elena sat at the counter in their small room, counting and recounting the bills Caleb Rowan had given her. Enough to pay the rent, enough to buy supplies, enough to breathe for the first time in months. Mia slept soundly on the bed, her doll tucked beneath her chin, her face peaceful in a way that made Elena's chest ache. She'd promised her daughter they wouldn't lose their home. She'd kept that promise, but now she'd made another promise. To a stranger who'd shown them more kindness in 10 minutes than the rest of the town had offered in 6 months. 3 pies a week. She could do that. She had to do that. Elena pulled out a scrap of paper and began calculating. Flour, sugar, butter, apples. She had enough for 2 weeks, maybe 3 if she stretched it. And then what? She forced the thought away. One problem at a time. That's how she'd survived this long. That's how she'd keep surviving. She tucked the money into the small wooden box where she kept their important things. Mia's birth certificate, her late husband's pocket watch, the single photograph of the 3 of them together. Her hand lingered on the watch. I'm trying, Thomas, she whispered into the quiet. I'm doing my best. The watch didn't answer. It never did. Elena closed the box, blew out the candle, and climbed into bed beside her daughter. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall, soft and silent, covering the town in white. 3 days later, Elena stood in the same small room, staring at the empty shelf where her supplies had been. Gone. All of it. She'd worked through the night baking the pies Caleb Rowan had ordered, pouring every bit of skill and care she had into each one. They'd turned out beautifully. Golden crusts, perfect fillings, the kind of pies that made your mouth water just looking at them. And she'd used every last bit of flour, every egg, every ounce of butter she had, because she'd assumed she'd have time to restock before the next order. She'd assumed wrong. Mrs. Calloway had come by that morning with another family interested in the room, putting pressure on Elena to pay not just this month's rent, but next month's as well. Just to be safe, the landlady had said, her tone making it clear it wasn't a request. Elena had paid it, and now she had just enough money left to feed Mia for a week. No supplies, no way to fulfill the order. No way to keep the promise she'd made. She pressed her palms against the counter, her breath coming short and shallow. What was she going to do? A knock at the door made her jump. She turned, her heart in her throat, and opened it. Caleb Rowan stood in the hallway, hat in hand, his expression as unreadable as ever. Morning, he said simply. Came to pick up the pies. Elena's mouth went dry. She stepped aside, let him in, watched as his gaze swept over the small room and landed on the 3 perfect pies cooling on the counter. These look good, he said. Thank you. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Caleb reached for his wallet, but Elena held up a hand. Wait. The word came out too sharp. She softened her tone. Mr. Rowan, I need to tell you something. He paused, his gaze sharpening slightly. All right. Elena folded her hands in front of her, forced herself to meet his eyes. I can't make any more pies after this. Silence. Caleb's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. Why not? I don't have the supplies. I used everything I had to make these, and She swallowed hard. I don't have the money to buy more right now. She waited for the disappointment, the anger, the moment when he'd realized she'd wasted his time. Instead, Caleb set his hat on the counter and crossed his arms. How much do you need? Elena blinked. I'm sorry? For supplies. How much do you need to keep baking? She hadn't expected this. Hadn't expected him to ask, to care. I couldn't possibly ask you for more money. You've already been more than generous. I'm not offering charity, Caleb said, his tone firm but not unkind. I'm offering work. You make the pies, I pay for them. Simple as that. It's not that simple, Elena's voice cracked slightly. You don't understand. This town, they don't trust me. They think I don't care what they think. The words cut through her spiraling thoughts, clear and absolute. Caleb stepped closer, his gaze steady. I care that you can bake better than anyone I've met. I care that you're trying to take care of your daughter. And I care that you're honest enough to tell me the truth instead of making excuses. Elena stared at him, her throat tight. Come work at the ranch, Caleb said quietly. Cook for me and my hands. Room and board included. Fair wage. You keep your dignity, I get decent food. Everybody wins. I have Mia. Bring her. You don't even know us. I know enough. Elena's chest felt too full, too tight, like something was breaking open inside her. She wanted to say yes. God, she wanted to say yes so badly it hurt. But fear held her back. Fear of failing again. Fear of depending on someone who might leave. Fear of hoping for something that could be taken away. Caleb seemed to see it all. Think about it, he said gently. Take your time. But the offer stands. He picked up his hat, paid her for the pies, and turned to leave. Mr. Rowan? He paused in the doorway. Why are you doing this? Elena's voice was barely a whisper. Why do you care? Caleb was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant, like he was looking at something only he could see. Because someone should have cared about me once, he said finally. And no one did. Then he was gone, his footsteps echoing down the stairs. Elena stood in the empty room, her hands shaking, her heart pounding. Mia appeared in the doorway of the bedroom, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Mama? Who was that? Elena knelt down and pulled her daughter into her arms, holding her close. That, she whispered, was a second chance. Elena made her decision 3 days later, standing in that same rented room with Mrs. Calloway's final eviction notice clutched in her hand. The choice, it turned out, had never really been hers to make. The town had already decided for her, decided she didn't belong, decided her efforts weren't worth their time, decided that a widow with a child was more burden than the community could bear. So when Caleb Rowan returned on the 4th day, his wagon waiting in the street below, Elena had 2 carpet bags packed and Mia dressed in her warmest clothes. We're ready, she said simply, meeting his eyes in the doorway. Caleb nodded, took the bags without a word, and carried them down to the wagon. He didn't ask what changed her mind, didn't need to. Some decisions explained themselves. Mia climbed into the back of the wagon, her doll tucked under one arm, her eyes wide as she took in the unfamiliar street from this new vantage point. Elena settled beside her daughter, pulling a blanket around both their shoulders as Caleb took the reins. The wagon rolled forward, and Elena didn't look back. Not at the mercantile. Not at the room that had never quite felt like home. Not at the town square where she'd spent months being invisible. She looked ahead instead, at the open road stretching toward the mountains, at the December sky heavy with the promise of snow, at the broad shoulders of the man who'd offered her something no one else had, a chance to prove her worth on her own terms. The ride took 2 hours, winding through pine forests and across frozen streams, climbing gradually into higher country where the air bit sharper and the silence ran deeper. Mia fell asleep against Elena's side, lulled by the rhythm of the wagon wheels and the warmth of the blanket. Elena stayed awake, watching the landscape change, feeling the weight of the decision settle into her bones. There was no going back now. Whatever came next, she'd have to face it. When the ranch finally came into view, nestled in a valley between 2 rolling hills, Elena's breath caught. It wasn't grand, wasn't the kind of place that made you think of wealth or comfort, but it was solid, a sturdy house with smoke rising from the chimney, a well-maintained barn, fences that looked like they'd been mended with care, outbuildings scattered across the property, A chicken coop, corrals for horses. Everything spoke of hard work and attention, of a man who took pride in what he'd built even if he didn't talk about it. Caleb brought the wagon to a stop near the house and climbed down. He reached up to help Elena, his hands steady and warm even through her glove. Mia woke as her feet touched the ground, blinking up at the house with sleepy curiosity. "Is this where we're staying, Mama?" "Yes, sweetheart," Elena said softly. "This is where we're staying." Caleb grabbed their bags and headed toward the house. "I'll show you your room. Get settled. We eat at 6. He pushed open the door and stood aside, letting them enter first. The interior was spare but clean. Wooden floors worn smooth by years of use, a stone fireplace crackling with fresh logs, simple furniture arranged with function in mind rather than decoration. A large kitchen dominated one side of the main room, with a cast-iron stove that looked like it had seen decades of service. The whole place smelled like wood smoke and leather and something Elena couldn't quite name, the scent of a space that had been lived in alone for too long. Caleb led them down a short hallway and opened a door. "This was my sister's room. Haven't used it in years. It's yours now." Elena stepped inside and felt something ease in her chest. The room was small but welcoming. A double bed with a patchwork quilt, a dresser with a mirror, a window that looked out over the valley. Someone had already laid a fire in the small wood stove in the corner, and the room held a gentle warmth. "It's perfect," Elena said, her voice catching slightly. "Thank you." Caleb set their bags down near the dresser. "Bathrooms across the hall, towels in the cabinet. If you need anything, let me know." He turned to leave, paused at the door. "Elena." It was the first time he'd used her name. She met his gaze. "You're safe here," he said quietly. "Both of you. I need you to know that." Elena's throat tightened. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Caleb left, pulling the door closed behind him. Mia immediately bounced onto the bed, testing the mattress with the kind of enthusiasm only a 5-year-old could muster after a long journey. "It's soft, Mama, and look, there's a quilt just like the one Grandma made." Elena sat beside her daughter, smoothing a hand over the worn fabric. Someone had put care into this quilt, stitched it with patience and skill. She wondered about Caleb's sister, about the life that had been lived in this room before it stood empty. "Let's unpack," Elena said gently, "and then we'll see about making supper." They worked together, putting their few belongings into the dresser, hanging Elena's 2 dresses in the small wardrobe, arranging Mia's doll on the pillow. It didn't take long, they didn't have much, but by the time they finished, the room felt less like a stranger's space and more like possibility. Elena found Caleb in the kitchen, standing at the counter with his sleeves rolled up, staring at a skillet like it had personally offended him. "I can take over," she offered. He looked up, relief flickering across his face before he schooled his expression back to neutral. "Appreciate it. I'm better with horses than cook stoves." Elena moved to the stove, assessing what she had to work with. The pantry was better stocked than she'd expected. Flour, cornmeal, dried beans, salt pork, preserves. Basic supplies, but enough to make something decent. "How many for supper?" she asked. 3 ranch hands. They eat in the bunkhouse usually, but I told them we'd have a proper meal tonight." He paused. "That too much?" "Not at all." Elena was already pulling out ingredients, her mind running through possibilities. "I'll need about an hour." "Take your time." Caleb disappeared outside and Elena lost herself in the familiar rhythm of cooking. Mia sat at the kitchen table, chattering about everything she'd seen on the journey, her voice a bright thread of sound in the quiet house. Elena made cornbread and beans, fried salt pork until it crisped at the edges, opened a jar of preserves to serve alongside. Simple food, but made with the kind of attention that elevated it beyond mere sustenance. When Caleb returned, he brought 3 men with him, weathered, work-worn ranch hands who looked like they'd been surprised by the invitation, but weren't about to refuse a hot meal. They filed in quietly, removing their hats, nodding respectfully to Elena. "Ma'am," the oldest one said, his voice rough with disuse. "Name's Ben. This here's Carter and young James." "Elena, it's nice to meet you all." She gestured to the table. "Please, sit." They sat with the careful movements of men unaccustomed to being guests, their eyes tracking Elena as she brought food to the table. When she set down the cornbread, still steaming from the oven, James actually inhaled audibly. "Lord have mercy," he muttered. Ben elbowed him. "Mind your manners." Caleb took a seat at the head of the table, and everyone waited, uncertain, until he picked up his fork. Only then did they begin eating. The first bite brought complete silence. Elena watched as expressions changed, as tension left shoulders, as something that looked almost like contentment settled over faces that seemed built for harder emotions. "Ma'am," Carter said finally, his voice thick with feeling, "I ain't had cornbread this good since my mama passed." "It's just cornbread," Elena said softly, but she felt warmth spread through her chest. "It ain't just anything," Ben said firmly. "This is the kind of food that reminds a man why he bothers getting up in the morning." Mia giggled, and the sound broke whatever remaining ice existed in the room. James winked at her, and she hid her face against Elena's arm, suddenly shy. They ate until the serving dishes were empty, until every last crumb of cornbread had been claimed, until the only sound was the scrape of forks against plates and the occasional satisfied sigh. When it was over, Ben pushed back from the table and looked at Caleb with something approaching reverence. "Boss, I don't know what you did to deserve this, but whatever it was, do it again." The other men murmured agreement. Caleb's mouth quirked in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "Thank Elena. She's the one who made it happen." 3 pairs of eyes turned to her with such naked gratitude that Elena felt her cheeks flush. "It was my pleasure," she said honestly. "Truly." The men took their leave, thanking her repeatedly, their voices warm in a way that made something tight in Elena's chest finally begin to loosen. When they were gone, Caleb helped clear the table, an offer Elena hadn't expected but didn't refuse. "They liked it," he said simply, stacking plates near the wash basin. "They were hungry for more than food," Elena replied, scrubbing a pot with more focus than it required. "They were hungry for home." Caleb was quiet for a moment, his hands still on the plates. "Yeah, I suppose they were." He glanced at her, and in the lamplight his expression held something Elena couldn't quite read. Gratitude, maybe. Or recognition. "You gave them that tonight," he said. "Thank you." Elena met his eyes. "You gave us a home. It's me who should be thanking you." "Then we're even." It was, Elena thought, the beginning of something. What exactly she couldn't say, but it felt solid beneath her feet in a way nothing had in a very long time. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that surprised Elena with its ease. She woke before dawn, the way she always had, and moved through the dark kitchen building fires, putting coffee on to boil, starting breakfast for men who worked hard and needed fuel to face the day. Mia slept late, curled beneath the patchwork quilt, and Elena treasured those quiet morning hours when the house belonged only to her and the gentle sounds of domesticity. Caleb appeared exactly at 6 every morning, his hair damp from washing, his expression still heavy with sleep, but his movements purposeful. He never said much, just poured coffee, nodded his thanks, and sat at the table reading week-old newspapers while Elena cooked. But he was present, steady, a quiet anchor in the room. The ranch hands came for breakfast at 6:30, stomping snow from their boots, their faces raw from the cold. They ate like men who'd forgotten what it meant to be fed well, and every morning they thanked Elena like she'd performed some kind of miracle, instead of just scrambling eggs and frying bacon. After breakfast, the house emptied. Caleb and the hands disappeared into the work of the ranch, mending fences, tending livestock, cutting wood for the winter stores. Mia would wake, and Elena would fix her a plate, and together they'd plan the day. Elena cooked. That was her domain, her purpose, and she threw herself into it with the kind of focus she'd learned during the lean months when cooking well was the only thing standing between her and complete despair. She baked bread, roasted meat, made stews that simmered all afternoon and filled the house with scents that seemed to soften even the harsh winter light. She explored the pantry, discovered preserves and smoked meats and root vegetables stored in the cellar. Caleb had prepared well for winter, but his preparations had been purely functional, survival, not comfort. Elena set about changing that. She made apple butter from dried apples, biscuits that rose tall and flaky, pot roast that fell apart at the touch of a fork. She fried chicken until the skin crackled, made gravy so rich it could have been a meal on its own, baked pies that made grown men go silent with something approaching religious devotion. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the house began to change. It wasn't just the food, though that was part of it. It was the way Mia's laughter echoed through rooms that had been silent for too long. The way Elena hummed while she worked, old songs her mother had taught her, melodies that seemed to settle into the walls and make them warmer. The way the kitchen always smelled like something worth coming home to. Even Caleb noticed. Elena caught him sometimes, standing in doorways with an expression she couldn't quite read, watching her move through the kitchen or listening to Mia tell elaborate stories to her doll. He never said anything about it, but she saw the way his shoulders seemed to carry less weight than they had that first day. 2 weeks into their stay, a blizzard rolled through the valley, burying the ranch under 2 feet of snow and making outdoor work impossible for 3 days. The ranch hands took shelter in the bunkhouse, playing cards and sleeping late, but Caleb had nowhere to go except the house. He tried to make himself scarce, retreating to his office or the small room off the kitchen where he kept his books and ledgers. But the house wasn't big enough for true isolation, and eventually he'd emerge, drawn by the warmth of the fire or the smell of whatever Elena was cooking. On the second day, Mia caught him trying to sneak past the kitchen. "Mr. Rowan!" She bounced up from where she'd been coloring at the table. "Do you want to help me build a fort?" Caleb froze, clearly unprepared for the question. "A fort?" "Yes, Mama said I could use the chairs and blankets, but I need someone tall to help with the roof." He glanced at Elena, something almost like panic flickering across his face. Elena bit back a smile. "You don't have to if you're busy." "I'm not busy," he said automatically, then seemed to realize he'd trapped himself. Mia grabbed his hand and tugged him toward the pile of blankets she'd already started arranging. "Come on, we can make it big enough for all of us." Elena watched as Caleb Rowan, hardened rancher and solitary man, allowed himself to be dragged into an afternoon of fort building by a determined 5-year-old. He approached it with the same seriousness he'd approach mending a fence, testing the structural integrity of chair placement, ensuring the blankets were secured properly. Mia supervised with the authority of a seasoned architect, declaring certain configurations unacceptable and demanding modifications until the fort met her exacting standards. By the time they finished, the entire corner of the main room had been transformed into an elaborate blanket structure with multiple chambers and a front entrance secured by clothespins. Mia crawled inside, declared it perfect, and immediately invited Caleb to join her for a tea party. He looked at Elena again, this time with something approaching genuine distress. "Go on," Elena said, unable to keep the amusement from her voice. "She won't take no for an answer." Caleb folded his tall frame into the cramped fort, his head brushing the blanket ceiling, and accepted the tiny wooden cup Mia pressed into his hand. "This is the best tea in all of Wyoming," Mia informed him solemnly. "You have to drink it with your pinky out." "Is that so?" "Yes. Mama taught me. It's very fancy." But Caleb extended his pinky with exaggerated care and took a pretend sip. "Delicious," Mia beamed. Elena turned back to her cooking, but she couldn't stop smiling. There was something profound about watching this guarded, lonely man awkwardly attending a child's tea party, his deep voice murmuring responses to Mia's endless chatter. That night, after Mia had been put to bed and the house had settled into quiet, Elena found Caleb standing by the window, looking out at the snow-covered valley. She almost left him alone. He seemed to carry his solitude like armor, and she'd learned not to push against it. But something made her stay. "She wore you out today," Elena said softly, moving to stand beside him. Caleb's mouth quirked. "I've wrestled steers that were easier to manage." "She likes you." "She doesn't know me." "She knows enough." Elena folded her arms, studying his profile. "You're kind to her. That's all she needs to know." Caleb was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. "I had a daughter once." The words hung in the air, heavy with old grief. Elena's breath caught. "Caleb, she was about Mia's age, dark curls just like hers, laughed the same way too." His voice was carefully controlled, each word measured. "Fever took her, took my wife too. 12 years ago this winter." Elena's chest tightened with the kind of pain that had no words for it. I'm so sorry. It was a long time ago. Time doesn't make it hurt less, just different. He looked at her then, really looked, and she saw recognition in his eyes, the kind that only came from shared experience. Your husband, he said. It wasn't a question. 2 years ago. Mine accident. Elena's voice stayed steady through practice. They said he didn't suffer. I don't know if that's true or if they just say that to make it easier. Probably both. They stood in silence, two people who'd learned that loss wasn't something you got over. You just learned to carry it differently. That's why you understand, Elena said finally. About Mia. About what it means to have something worth protecting. Caleb nodded slowly. And that's why you took the risk of coming here. Because staying meant dying slowly, instead of all at once. Yes. He turned back to the window, his reflection ghostly in the dark glass. My sister used to say this house was too quiet. Said a place this size needed noise to feel alive. He paused. She was right. Is that why you offered us this? Partly. Caleb's jaw tightened. Also because I watched that town treat you like you were invisible, and I knew how that felt. Elena waited, sensing there was more. I came here 12 years ago with nothing, he continued. Built this place with my bare hands, worked until I couldn't stand, proved myself a dozen times over. And you know what? They still don't trust me, still treat me like an outsider. Because I'm not one of them, never will be. So you saw us and recognized the same thing. Yeah, he met her eyes. And I figured if I was going to be alone anyway, might as well be alone with people who understand what that means. It was the most he'd said at once since she'd met him, and Elena understood it for what it was. An offering. A glimpse behind the walls he'd built so carefully. We're not charity to you, she said softly. We're company. You're more than that. Caleb's voice roughened slightly. You're bringing this place back to life, and I didn't realize how much I needed that until you got here. Elena's throat tightened. She wanted to tell him she understood, that she felt it too, this fragile, tentative thing growing between them that was more than employer and employee, but less than anything she could name. Instead, she said, Thank you for telling me about your daughter. Thank you for listening. They stood together a moment longer, and then Caleb cleared his throat and stepped back, retreating into the safety of distance. Morning comes early, he said. It does. Good night, Elena. Good night, Caleb. He disappeared down the hall to his room, and Elena remained by the window, watching snow fall in the darkness, feeling the weight of what had just passed between them settle into her bones. This place, she realized, was becoming home in a way the town had never managed, and that terrified her more than she wanted to admit. The third week brought a visitor that shattered the fragile peace they'd built. Elena was rolling out pie dough when she heard the wagon, the sharp crack of wheels on frozen ground cutting through the afternoon quiet. Mia looked up from her coloring, curiosity bright on her face. Are we expecting someone, Mama? I don't think so, sweetheart. Elena wiped her hands on her apron and moved to the window. A familiar wagon sat in the yard, and her stomach dropped. Mrs. Calloway. The landlady from town climbed down with the help of a man Elena didn't recognize, her face set in lines of grim determination. Caleb emerged from the barn, his posture immediately defensive as he approached them. Elena couldn't hear the conversation, but she could read the tension in Caleb's shoulders, the way his jaw tightened, the sharp gestures Mrs. Calloway made toward the house, toward Elena. The door opened without warning, and Mrs. Calloway swept in with the authority of someone who believed moral righteousness gave her the right to trespass. Mrs. Hart, her voice was cold, I should have known I'd find you here. Elena straightened, forcing calm into her voice. Mrs. Calloway, what brings you all the way out here? Concern for your welfare, of course. The older woman's gaze swept over the kitchen, taking in the flour-dusted counter, the pies cooling on the windowsill, Mia's drawings scattered across the table. Though I see my concerns were well-founded. Caleb appeared in the doorway, his expression thunderous. I told you this is none of your business. It's the business of every decent person in Ridgefield when a widow woman moves onto a bachelor's ranch without the benefit of marriage. Mrs. Calloway turned her sharp gaze on Elena. Think of your daughter, Mrs. Hart. What kind of example are you setting? Heat flooded Elena's face. I'm working, earning honest wages, cooking and keeping house. There's nothing improper about it. Isn't there? The landlady's tone dripped with insinuation. A beautiful young woman, a lonely man, living under the same roof? You can't be so naive as to think people won't talk. Then let them talk, Caleb said flatly. Elena works for me. That's all there is to it. For now, perhaps. Mrs. Calloway folded her hands primly. But reputations are delicate things, Mr. Rowan. Once damaged, they're nearly impossible to repair, especially for a child. The words hit their mark. Elena felt ice spread through her chest as Mrs. Calloway's gaze shifted to Mia, who had gone very still and quiet. Mrs. Hart, I'm prepared to offer you a position in town, respectable work at the boarding house, room included. You and your daughter would be under proper supervision and— No. Elena's voice came out stronger than she felt. Thank you, but no. You're refusing? I have work here, good work that pays well and allows me to care for my daughter. I'm not leaving. Mrs. Calloway's expression hardened. Then you leave me no choice but to speak to the church elders. They'll want to know about these arrangements. You can speak to whoever you want, Caleb said, his voice dangerous now. But you're going to leave my property now. The landlady drew herself up, offended dignity radiating from every line of her body. Very well. But mark my words, this won't end well for either of you. Scandal has a way of spreading, Mr. Rowan, and when it does, you'll find yourself even more isolated than you already are. She swept out, her companion trailing behind, and the door closed with a sharp finality. Silence filled the kitchen. Mia looked up at Elena, her eyes too big, too frightened. Mama? Are we in trouble? Elena knelt beside her daughter, smoothing back her curls. No, sweetheart. Everything's fine. But it wasn't fine, and they both knew it. Caleb stood frozen by the door, his fists clenched, his face carved from stone. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with barely contained fury. I'm sorry. This is my fault. I didn't think about how it would look. It's not your fault, Elena said quietly, rising to her feet. She's right, though. People will talk. Let them. It's not that simple. Elena's hands trembled, and she pressed them flat against her apron to still them. Mia has to grow up here. She'll have to go to school, make friends, build a life. If there's scandal attached to our name, there's no scandal. You work for me. That's the truth. The truth doesn't matter when people have already decided what they want to believe. Caleb looked at her, and she saw the war playing out behind his eyes. The desire to fight, to protect, crashing against the knowledge that some battles couldn't be won with stubbornness alone. What do you want to do? He asked finally. Elena looked at Mia, at the fear written across her small face, at the security they'd found here threatening to crumble before it had even fully formed. She thought about going back to town, to the boarding house and Mrs. Calloway's supervision, to the same invisible existence they'd fled. She thought about staying, about letting the scandal break over them and hoping they'd survive it. Neither option felt like winning. I don't know, Elena admitted, her voice barely a whisper. I honestly don't know. Caleb crossed the kitchen in 3 strides and gripped her shoulders, forcing her to meet his eyes. Listen to me, he said fiercely. You and Mia belong here. This is your home now, and I don't give a damn what anyone in that town thinks about it. But Mia, we'll be fine. We'll make sure she's fine. His grip gentled, his voice softening. Elena, I've lived my whole life caring what other people think, trying to prove I'm good enough to deserve their respect. It never worked. Know why? She shook her head. Because people like Mrs. Calloway don't want the truth. They want validation for the judgments they've already made. Caleb's gaze burned with conviction. The only person whose opinion matters is yours. So I'm asking again, what do you want? Elena's breath caught. When was the last time anyone had asked her that? When was the last time her wants had mattered at all? I want to stay, she whispered. I want Mia to have a home that's warm and safe. I want to keep cooking and making this place feel alive. I want... Her voice broke, and suddenly Caleb's arms were around her, pulling her close, and Elena let herself collapse against his chest for just a moment, let herself be held by someone who saw her as more than a problem to be solved. Then stay, he murmured into her hair. We'll figure out the rest. They stood like that for a long moment, and Elena felt something shift and settle inside her. A decision made, a line crossed, a future chosen despite the cost. When she finally pulled back, Mia was watching them with wide, uncertain eyes. Elena crossed to her daughter and knelt down. "Sweetheart, we're staying here. Is that all right with you?" Mia nodded slowly. "I like it here, Mama. Mr. Rowan makes you smile." The simple observation nearly broke Elena's heart. "He does," she agreed softly. "And this is a good place for us. So we're going to stay, and we're not going to worry about what anyone else thinks, okay?" "Okay?" Mia hesitated, then asked in a small voice, "Are people going to be mean to us?" Elena couldn't lie to her. "Some might be, but we've faced mean people before, haven't we? And we're still here." "We're strong," Mia said, repeating the words Elena had told her 100 times before. "That's right, we're strong." Elena pulled her daughter close. "And we're not alone anymore." Mia's gaze shifted to Caleb, who stood watching them with an expression Elena couldn't quite read. "Mr. Rowan?" Mia's voice was tentative. "Are you our family now?" The question hung in the air, too big and too honest for the moment to contain. Caleb's throat worked. When he spoke, his voice was rough but certain. "Yeah, kid, I think maybe I am." And Elena, listening to those words, felt the last of her resistance crumble into dust. They were staying. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. The words settled into the room like snow finding its place on frozen ground. Quiet, inevitable, transforming everything they touched. Mia's face lit up with a joy so pure it made Elena's chest ache. She launched herself at Caleb, wrapping her small arms around his legs with the unguarded trust only children possessed. Caleb stood frozen for a heartbeat, then slowly, carefully, rested his hand on top of her head. Elena watched them, this gruff rancher and her fearless daughter, and felt something fundamental shift inside her. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were building something real. But Mrs. Calloway's visit had planted seeds of doubt that took root in the days that followed, growing in the dark spaces between certainty and fear. Elena caught herself watching the road for more visitors, tensing at unexpected sounds, wondering when the next judgment would arrive and what form it would take. Caleb noticed. He always noticed. 3 days after Mrs. Calloway's intrusion, he found Elena standing at the kitchen window long after Mia had gone to bed, her arms wrapped around herself, staring out at nothing. "You haven't slept," he said quietly from the doorway. Elena didn't turn around. "I sleep enough." "Elena." The way he said her name, gentle but firm, made her throat tighten. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass. "What if she's right?" The words came out barely above a whisper. "What if staying here ruins Mia's chances at a normal life? What if the scandal follows her everywhere, makes other children cruel, closes doors before she's old enough to know they existed?" Caleb crossed the room and stood beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth, but not touching. What if it doesn't? That's not an answer. Neither is running from every possible bad outcome. He paused, choosing his words with care. "My daughter, Sarah, she died before she ever had the chance to face the world's cruelty. And you know what I learned from that?" Elena finally looked at him, saw the raw grief still living in his eyes after all these years. "The world's going to be cruel no matter what we do," Caleb continued, his voice rough with emotion. "The only question is whether we give our children the tools to face it with strength, or whether we teach them that hiding is the only way to survive. I'm not teaching her to hide. I'm trying to protect her. By living in fear? By believing the worst of people before they've even spoken?" Caleb shook his head. "That's not protection, Elena. That's just another kind of prison." The truth of it stung because he was right. She'd spent 2 years in that prison, letting other people's judgments dictate her choices, making herself smaller and quieter until she'd almost disappeared entirely. "I don't know how to do anything else," she admitted, her voice breaking. I don't know how to be brave when everything I love can be taken away. Caleb's hand found hers in the darkness, his calloused fingers wrapping around her smaller ones with surprising gentleness. You're already brave. You came here, didn't you? Took a chance on a stranger and a life you didn't know. That takes more courage than most people ever manage. Elena looked down at their joined hands, at the way his thumb traced absent circles over her knuckles. It was such a small gesture, but it anchored her in a way nothing else had. What if I'm not strong enough? She whispered. You don't have to be. Not alone. Caleb's other hand came up to cup her face, tilting it gently so she had to meet his eyes. That's what I'm trying to tell you. You're not alone anymore. The distance between them seemed to collapse without either of them moving, and Elena became acutely aware of every point where their bodies almost touched. His hand on her cheek, his thumb brushing her jaw, the bare inches separating them. She saw the moment Caleb realized it too, saw his pupils dilate, his breathing change, saw him start to pull back, retreat into safety. And before she could think better of it, before fear could stop her, Elena closed the distance and kissed him. It was soft at first, tentative, a question more than a statement. But then Caleb made a sound low in his throat and kissed her back, and suddenly there was nothing tentative about it. His arms came around her, pulling her close, and Elena melted into him with a desperate kind of relief, like she'd been holding her breath for years and finally remembered how to exhale. They broke apart slowly, breathing hard, foreheads pressed together in the lamplight. Elena! Caleb's voice was wrecked. We shouldn't. Why not? Because you work for me. Because people are already talking. Because you're scared, Elena finished gently. Just like I am. He pulled back enough to look at her, and she saw everything written plainly on his face, want and fear and hope all tangled together. I'm terrified, he admitted. I lost everyone I ever loved. I built this ranch so I'd never have to feel that again. And then you showed up, and suddenly I'm feeling everything I swore I'd never let myself feel. Elena's eyes burned. I know exactly what you mean. So what do we do? It was the same question she'd asked him days ago, but now it meant something different. Now it wasn't about scandal or propriety or what other people thought. It was about them, about what they wanted their lives to become. We choose, Elena said simply, we choose to be brave instead of safe. We choose to believe that good things can happen even after terrible loss. We choose each other. Caleb stared at her for a long moment, and then he laughed, a rough, wondering sound. When did you get so wise? About 3 seconds ago, Elena smiled despite the tears threatening to fall. I'm making this up as I go. That makes 2 of us. He kissed her again, slower this time, savoring it, and Elena felt pieces of herself she'd thought were broken forever start to knit back together. When they finally pulled apart, Caleb rested his forehead against hers and sighed. This is going to make things more complicated. Everything worth having is complicated. True enough? He stepped back reluctantly, putting space between them, even though his hand lingered in hers. We should probably talk about this, figure out what it means. Tomorrow, Elena said. Tonight, let's just... A sound from the hallway made them both freeze. Mia stood in the doorway, rubbing her eyes, her doll dragging on the floor behind her. Mama, I had a bad dream. Elena's heart lurched with guilt and something like panic, but Caleb's hand squeezed hers once before letting go, steady and reassuring. Come here, sweetheart. Elena crossed to her daughter and scooped her up. Let's get you back to bed. Will you stay with me? Of course. Elena carried Mia back to their room, tucked her in, and lay down beside her in the narrow bed. Mia curled into her side, already half asleep again. Mama? Mia's voice was drowsy. Are you happy here? The question caught Elena off guard. She thought about it honestly, thought about the kitchen filled with good smells and warm light, about the ranch hands who thanked her like she'd given them gold instead of biscuits, about Caleb's arms around her and the way fear felt different when you didn't face it alone. Yes, baby, she whispered. I think I am. Good, me too. Mia's breathing evened out into sleep, but Elena lay awake long into the night, her heart still racing, her lips still tingling from Caleb's kiss. She'd crossed a line tonight. There was no going back. and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she didn't want to. The next morning brought frost so thick it looked like the world had been dipped in sugar, and with it came a knock at the door that shattered the fragile hope Elena had allowed herself to feel. She was making breakfast, humming under her breath, when she heard Caleb's boots on the porch. He'd been out checking on the livestock, and she'd made fresh coffee the way he liked it, strong enough to wake the dead. But when the door opened, it wasn't just Caleb. Reverend Michaels from the Ridgefield Church stood on the threshold, his round face set in lines of concern that didn't quite hide the judgment beneath. Behind him, two church elders Elena recognized from her brief time in town. Mr. Peterson and Mr. Hartley waited with folded arms and expressions that promised nothing good. Elena's stomach dropped. Caleb's jaw was clenched tight, his eyes hard as flint. "I told you this wasn't necessary, and I told you it's precisely because it's necessary that we're here." Reverend Michaels removed his hat as he entered, his gaze sweeping the kitchen and landing on Elena with pointed significance. "Mrs. Hart, good morning." "Reverend." Elena forced steadiness into her voice even as her hands trembled. She set down the spatula and wiped her palms on her apron. "Would you like some coffee?" "This isn't a social call, I'm afraid." The Reverend's tone was gentle but inflexible. "We've come to discuss a matter of some delicacy." Mia appeared in the hallway, drawn by the unfamiliar voices. She took one look at the stern-faced men and retreated to Elena's side, pressing close. Caleb's expression darkened further. "Whatever you have to say it and leave." "Mr. Rowan, we're here out of Christian concern for your soul and for Mrs. Hart's reputation." Mr. Peterson spoke with the confidence of a man who'd never questioned his own righteousness. "The entire town is talking about the impropriety of this arrangement." "Then the entire town needs to find better things to do with their time," Caleb shot back. "Be that as it may, we cannot stand idly by while scandal threatens the moral fabric of our community." Mr. Hartley pulled out a folded paper from his coat. "We've drafted a petition requesting that Mrs. Hart return to town where proper supervision can be maintained." Elena felt the blood drain from her face. "A petition?" "Signed by 37 concerned citizens," the Reverend said, almost apologetically. "Mrs. Hart, please understand, we're not questioning your character, but appearances matter, especially for the sake of your daughter." "My daughter is fine," Elena said, her voice shaking with suppressed anger. "She's happy here. She's safe. She's cared for." "By a man who has no legal relationship to either of you," Mr. Peterson interjected. "It's unseemly, Mrs. Hart. Surely you must see that." "What I see," Elena said, her hands curling into fists in her apron, "is a group of men who've decided to interfere in my life without knowing a single true thing about it." "We know enough," Mr. Hartley said stiffly. "We know you're living under the same roof as an unmarried man. We know you share meals, share space, They share a house where she works," Caleb interrupted, his voice dangerous now. "Where she earns honest wages doing honest work. There's nothing improper about it." "Perhaps not indeed," Reverend Michaels said carefully. "But in appearance, Mr. Rowan, you must understand how this looks to those who don't know you." "I don't care how it looks. But you should care about Mrs. Hart's future, about her daughter's future." The Reverend's gaze softened as it landed on Mia. This child deserves to grow up without the taint of scandal following her, without other children whispering about her mother's choices. The words hit their mark. Elena felt them like physical blows, each one confirming the fears that had kept her awake the night before. Mia's hand tightened in hers, and Elena looked down to see confusion and fear written across her daughter's small face. "What scandal, Mama?" Mia whispered. Elena's heart shattered. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice barely controlled, "I appreciate your concern, but my daughter and I are staying here. This is our home." "Mrs. Hart, no." The word came out sharper than she intended. "You've said your piece. Now I'm asking you to leave." The three men exchanged glances, some silent communication passing between them. "Very well," Reverend Michaels said finally, his disappointment evident. "But please consider what we've said. The door remains open for you to return to town under respectable circumstances. We would welcome you at the boarding house, and I'm certain we could find suitable work that wouldn't compromise your reputation." She has suitable work, Caleb said flatly. Here. Mr. Rowan, there is one way to silence the talk. The Reverend's gaze moved between Elena and Caleb with pointed meaning. If your relationship with Mrs. Hart were to be formalized, get out, Caleb's voice could have cut glass. Now. The men filed out, their expressions ranging from disappointment to disgust. Reverend Michaels paused at the door. I'll pray for you both, he said quietly, and for the child. The door closed and silence crashed down like a fallen tree. Elena stood frozen, still gripping Mia's hand, her mind reeling. 37 signatures. 37 people who'd decided her life wasn't good enough, wasn't proper enough, wasn't worth defending. Mama? Mia's voice was small and frightened. Are we in trouble? Elena couldn't answer. Her throat had closed around words that wouldn't come. Caleb crossed to them in 2 strides and knelt so he was eye level with Mia. No, sweetheart, you're not in trouble. Those men were just confused about some things. They didn't like us living here. They don't understand it, Caleb corrected gently. But that's their problem, not yours. You belong here, both of you. Don't ever doubt that. Mia nodded, but her eyes were still too big, too scared. Elena found her voice. Mia, go play in our room for a bit, okay? Mr. Rowan and I need to talk. Okay, Mama. Mia disappeared down the hall, and the moment she was gone, Elena's knees buckled. She caught herself against the counter, her breathing ragged. They're not going to stop, she said, her voice hollow. They're going to keep coming, keep pushing, until they've destroyed everything. Then let them come, Caleb said fiercely. We'll face them together. You heard what he said. About Mia. About other children whispering. Elena's hand shook as she gripped the counter. What if he's right? What if I'm being selfish, keeping her here, exposing her to gossip that could follow her for years? You're not being selfish, you're giving her a home. A home that comes with scandal attached. The words burst out of Elena like a dam breaking. You don't understand what it's like, Caleb. You're a man. Your reputation can survive almost anything. But me? A widow living with a bachelor? That stain never washes off. And it won't just be mine. It'll be hers, too. Caleb moved toward her, but Elena held up a hand, stopping him. Don't, she whispered. Please don't make this harder than it already is. Harder than what? Elena, what are you saying? She couldn't look at him. If she looked at him, she'd lose her resolve entirely. I'm saying maybe they're right. Maybe the only way to protect Mia is to leave. The silence that followed was absolute. You want to go back to town? Caleb's voice was carefully neutral, but she heard the pain beneath it. Back to that room where you couldn't afford rent? Back to the market where people looked through you like you didn't exist? I don't want to, Elena said, tears streaming down her face now. I want to stay here. I want to cook in this kitchen and watch Mia laugh and feel like I finally found a place where I belong. But what I want doesn't matter if it hurts my daughter. And you think leaving will hurt her less? Caleb's control was fraying. You think she won't remember this place? Won't remember feeling safe and happy? Won't remember that her mother chose other people's opinions over their own happiness? That's not fair. None of this is fair. Caleb's voice rose, anger and desperation bleeding through. But running away won't change anything. You'll still be a widow. You'll still struggle to find work. The only difference is you'll be alone and miserable instead of here where you're wanted. Wanted, Elena repeated bitterly. By you. One man. Against an entire town. Yes, against an entire town. Against 100 towns if that's what it takes. Caleb closed the distance between them despite her protest, gripping her shoulders. Elena, listen to me. I know you're scared. I'm scared too. But last night you told me we should choose to be brave instead of safe. Was that just words, or did you mean it? Elena closed her eyes, unable to bear the intensity of his gaze. I meant it in the moment. But in the daylight, with men at our door demanding we justify our existence, they can demand all they want. We don't owe them explanations. But we owe Mia a future that isn't defined by her mother's scandal. Caleb's grip gentled, his thumbs tracing circles on her shoulders. There's one way to end the scandal. You know that. Elena's eyes flew open. What? The Reverend said it himself. If our relationship were formalized, no. Elena stepped back, breaking contact. Absolutely not. Why not? Because marriage to fix a scandal isn't marriage, Caleb. It's just another kind of cage. What if I don't see it that way? His voice dropped, became something raw and vulnerable. What if I want to marry you not because of scandal, but because I'm falling in love with you? The words hung between them, too big and too true to ignore. Elena's breath caught. Don't say things like that. Why not? It's true. Caleb moved toward her again, slower this time, giving her space to retreat if she wanted. I've been alone for 12 years, Elena. I built walls so high I thought nothing could breach them. And then you walked into my life with your quiet strength and your stubborn daughter and your pies that taste like home, and suddenly I'm feeling things I swore I'd never feel again. Caleb, I love the way you hum while you cook. I love the way you defend Mia like a lioness even when you're terrified. I love that you took a chance on me when you had every reason not to. His hand cupped her cheek, gentle and sure. I love you, Elena Hart, and I want to marry you. Not to silence gossip, but because I can't imagine my life without you in it anymore. Elena felt her defenses crumbling, felt hope and fear warring in her chest. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you're brave and kind and stronger than you give yourself credit for. I know you make this house feel alive in a way it hasn't since my daughter died. I know that when I look at you, I see a future instead of just survival. What if it doesn't work? Elena whispered. What if we try and fail and ruin everything? What if we try and succeed? Caleb countered. What if we build something real and lasting? What if we give Mia the family she deserves and each other the second chance we never expected to get? Elena wanted to say yes. Every part of her wanted to say yes, but the fear was still there, wrapped around her heart like barbed wire. I need time, she said finally, to think, to talk to Mia, to figure out if this is really what I want or just what I'm afraid to refuse. Caleb nodded, though she saw disappointment flicker across his face. How much time? I don't know, a few days? A week? Take what you need. He stepped back, giving her space. But Elena, don't let fear make this decision for you. Make it because it's what you actually want, one way or another. He left then, the door closing softly behind him, and Elena sank into a chair at the kitchen table. She thought the choice was between staying or leaving, between scandal or safety. But Caleb had just offered her a third option, one that terrified her more than either of the others, a real future, a real family, a real chance at happiness. And she had no idea if she was brave enough to take it. The next 3 days passed in a haze of uncertainty and careful distance. Caleb gave Elena the space she'd asked for, speaking to her only when necessary, his eyes holding questions he didn't voice. The ranch hands sensed the tension and ate their meals quickly, thanking Elena quietly before retreating to the bunkhouse. Mia felt it too. She grew quieter, more watchful, her usual chatter dimmed by worry she didn't understand. On the third night, Elena found her daughter sitting by the window in their room, staring out at the darkening valley. What are you thinking about, sweetheart? Elena asked, settling beside her. Mia was quiet for a long moment. Are we going to leave? Elena's heart clenched. What makes you ask that? You look sad, like you did before we came here, and Mr. Rowan looks sad too. Mia turned to face her mother, her expression far too serious for 5 years old. I don't want to leave, Mama. I like it here. I know you do, baby. Don't you like it here too? I do, very much. Then why would we go? How could Elena explain to a child the weight of judgment, the sting of scandal, the fear that loving something made you vulnerable to losing it? She couldn't, so she tried a different approach. Mia, what do you think of Mr. Rowan? Mia's face brightened immediately. I love him. He's nice, and he builds good forts, and he lets me help feed the horses, and he makes you smile again. He does make me smile, Elena admitted softly. Do you love him too, Mama? The question was so direct, so innocent, that Elena couldn't hide behind polite deflection. Did she love Caleb Rowan? She thought about the way he'd stood up to Mrs. Calloway, defending their right to stay without hesitation. The way he listened when she talked, really listened, like her words mattered. The way he was gentle with Mia, giving her the father figure she desperately needed without ever trying to replace the one she'd lost. She thought about his kiss, about the way being in his arms felt like coming home after a long journey. "Yes," Elena whispered. "I think I do." "Then why can't we just be happy?" Mia asked with the perfect logic of childhood. "Why does it have to be complicated?" "Because grown-up things are always complicated, sweetheart." "That's silly," Mia declared. "If you love someone and they love you and everyone's happy, that should be the end of it." Elena pulled her daughter close, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. "You're right. It should be that simple." "So let's make it simple," Mia said. "Let's stay here and be a family with Mr. Rowan. Please, Mama. Please." And just like that, with the clarity only children possessed, Elena's daughter showed her the truth she'd been too afraid to see. She was making it complicated because fear made everything complicated. But the actual choice, the one that mattered, that was simple. Stay or go. Love or run. Choose fear or choose hope. Elena had been choosing fear for 2 years, and it had brought her nothing but loneliness and exhaustion. Maybe it was time to choose hope instead. "Okay," Elena said, her voice steady for the first time in days. "Okay, sweetheart. We'll stay." Mia threw her arms around her mother's neck, squeezing tight. "Really? Promise?" "I promise." Elena held her daughter close, feeling pieces of herself lock into place. "We're home, Mia, and we're not leaving." She just had to tell Caleb. Elena found Caleb in the barn an hour later, brushing down his horse by lamplight, his movements slow and methodical like a man trying to keep his hands busy so his mind couldn't wander. He looked up when she entered, surprise flickering across his face before he schooled it back to neutral. "Elena, everything all right? I need to talk to you." Something in her tone made him set down the brush immediately. "Okay." Elena stepped deeper into the barn, the smell of hay and leather wrapping around her, steadying her nerves. She'd rehearsed what she wanted to say a dozen times while walking from the house, but now that he was in front of her, watching her with those careful eyes, the words scattered. "I made my decision," she said finally. Caleb went very still. "And? I'm staying. We're staying. Mia and we want to be here." She saw relief crash over him like a wave, saw his shoulders drop, his jaw unclench, but he didn't move toward her, didn't reach for her, just stood there, waiting. "But I need you to understand something," Elena continued, her voice gaining strength. "I'm not staying because I'm afraid to leave. I'm not staying because I need rescuing or because I have nowhere else to go. I'm staying because this is where I want to be. Because you've given us something I didn't think we'd ever find again. A home that feels real." "Elena, let me finish." She held up a hand, needing to get it all out before courage failed her. "You asked me to marry you 3 days ago, and I panicked because I thought you were just trying to fix a problem, trying to silence scandal, or protect my reputation, or do what you thought was right." "That's not why I asked," Caleb said quietly. "I know that now. I know because I've been watching you these past 3 days, seeing how miserable you've been giving me space, seeing how hard you've tried not to push even though waiting is killing you." Elena took a step closer. "You asked because you meant it, because you actually want this, want us, not just as a solution to someone else's judgment, but as something real." Caleb's throat worked. "I do want it, more than I've wanted anything in 12 years. "Then ask me again," Elena whispered. "Ask me right now, here in this barn with hay in your hair and dirt on your boots. Ask me when there's no one watching, no pressure, no scandal to fix. Just you and me and the truth." Caleb stared at her for a long moment, and then he crossed the distance between them in 3 strides. He took her hands in his, calloused and warm and steady. "Elena Hart," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "will you marry me? Not because anyone says we should, not to silence gossip or protect reputations, but because I love you, because I want to wake up next to you every morning and go to sleep beside you every night, because I want to raise Mia with you and build a life that's ours, because you make me believe in second chances." Tears spilled down Elena's cheeks, but she was smiling, actually smiling, her heart so full it hurt. Yes, she said. Yes, Caleb. I'll marry you. He kissed her then, pulling her close, and it was different from their first kiss. No desperation, no fear, just pure joy and relief and promise. Elena wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back, tasting salt from her own tears and feeling the steady beat of his heart against her chest. When they finally broke apart, Caleb rested his forehead against hers, breathing hard. We should probably tell Mia, he said. Elena laughed, the sound light and free. She already knows. She's the one who convinced me to say yes. Smart kid. The smartest. Elena pulled back just enough to look at him. We should do it soon. The wedding. Before the town has time to organize another petition or send more delegations to save our souls. How soon? End of the week? Just us, Mia, the ranch hands. Nothing fancy, just real. Caleb's smile was slow and genuine, transforming his entire face. I can work with that. They walked back to the house hand in hand, and when they stepped inside, Mia was waiting at the kitchen table, her doll clutched in her arms, her eyes bright with hope. Well, she demanded, are we going to be a family? Caleb knelt in front of her, his expression serious. Mia, I'd like to marry your mama, but I need to know if that's okay with you. Mia's face scrunched up in thought, considering this with the gravity it deserved. Will you be my papa? Caleb's breath caught. Elena saw him struggle with the weight of that question, with what it meant to step into a role left vacant by death. I can't replace your papa, he said carefully. He'll always be part of you, and that's how it should be. But if you'll let me, I'd like to be here for you, to take care of you and your mama, to be someone you can count on. Mia studied him for a long moment, then nodded decisively. Okay, you can marry mama, but you have to promise to always build good forts. Caleb's laugh was choked with emotion. I promise. Mia launched herself at him, hugging him tight, and Caleb held her like she was precious, his eyes closing against tears. Elena watched them, her heart so full she thought it might burst, and knew with absolute certainty that she'd made the right choice. The next morning, word spread through the ranch like wildfire. Ben, Carter, and James showed up at the house before breakfast, grinning like they'd won money. Boss says you're getting married, Ben announced, his weathered face creased with genuine happiness. About damn time, if you ask me. Elena blushed. We haven't set a date yet. End of the week, Caleb said, appearing behind her with coffee. Saturday, and you're all invited. The ranch hands whooped like schoolboys, slapping Caleb on the back and congratulating Elena until she was dizzy. We'll fix up the barn, James said eagerly. Clean it proper, hang some lanterns, make it real nice. You don't have to, Elena started. Ma'am, with all due respect, we've been eating your cooking for a month now. This is the least we can do. Carter's expression was earnest. You made this place feel like home again. Let us help make your wedding day special. Elena looked at these rough men who'd adopted her and Mia without hesitation, who'd defended their right to be here even when the town turned against them, and felt tears prick her eyes. Thank you, she managed. That would mean the world to us. They scattered to start preparations, leaving Elena and Caleb alone in the kitchen with Mia, who was already planning her outfit with the seriousness of a general plotting strategy. I need a new dress, Mia declared. A fancy one, with ribbons. We'll see what we can do, Elena said, though she had no idea where she'd find a dress shop that wouldn't treat them like pariahs. Caleb caught her eye over Mia's head, reading her worry. I'll ride to Hastings tomorrow. It's 2 towns over. Bigger, more anonymous. We can get whatever you need there. We can't afford... Elena. His tone was gentle but firm. I'm not poor. I've been saving money for years with nothing to spend it on. Let me do this. Please. She wanted to argue, but the look in his eyes stopped her. This mattered to him, being able to provide, to give them this one perfect day. Okay, she said softly. Thank you. The trip to Hastings took most of the next day. Caleb drove the wagon with Elena beside him and Mia bouncing in the back, pointing out every interesting rock and bird and cloud formation. Hastings was everything Ridgefield wasn't, bustling, indifferent, too busy with its own concerns to care about one more widow and her daughter. They found a dress shop run by a kind woman who didn't ask questions, just measured and pinned and promised alterations by Friday. Elena chose something simple, cream-colored cotton with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs, elegant without being ostentatious. Mia picked out a blue dress with white ribbons that made her look like a miniature angel. While the seamstress worked, Caleb disappeared and returned with a small velvet box. "What's this?" Elena asked. "Wedding ring." He opened it to reveal a simple gold band, no stones, just clean lines and honest metal. "Unless you want something fancier." "It's perfect," Elena interrupted, her throat tight. She slipped it on her finger. It fit like it had been made for her. Absolutely perfect. They ate lunch at a small restaurant where no one knew them, where they could be just another family enjoying a meal together. Mia chattered about the wedding, about her new dress, about how she was going to make sure everyone had enough pie. On the ride home, with Mia asleep in the back and the sun setting in brilliant oranges and pinks, Caleb reached over and took Elena's hand. "Nervous?" he asked. "Terrified," Elena admitted. "But in a good way. Like standing at the edge of something and knowing you're about to jump." "I'll catch you," Caleb said simply. Elena squeezed his hand. "I know." They arrived back at the ranch to find the barn transformed. True to their word, the ranch hands had cleaned every corner, hung lanterns from the rafters, arranged hay bales covered with blankets to create makeshift seating. Someone had even found wildflowers, dried but still beautiful, and woven them into garlands. "Oh," Elena breathed, taking it in. "It's beautiful." Ben appeared from behind the barn, looking pleased with himself. "Figured we'd give you a proper place to get married. Nothing fancy, but it's honest. Seemed fitting." "It's more than fitting," Elena said, her voice thick. "It's perfect. Thank you." The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation. Elena baked pies and bread, made a roast that could feed a small army, prepared side dishes that filled every available surface in the kitchen. The ranch hands contributed what they could. Carter carved wooden figures as decorations. James cleaned and polished his fiddle to provide music. Ben rehearsed the brief ceremony he'd agreed to perform, having once been a lay minister before drifting west. Mia appointed herself official wedding planner, directing everyone with the confidence of someone who'd done this 100 times. She made place cards from scraps of paper, arranged the wildflowers just so, and practiced walking with solemn steps while carrying her doll as a pretend bouquet. Friday night, Elena stood in her room looking at her wedding dress hanging on the wardrobe, still not quite believing this was real. A soft knock made her turn. Caleb stood in the doorway, hesitant. "Can I come in?" "Of course." He entered, closing the door behind him, and for a moment they just looked at each other. "Having second thoughts?" Caleb asked. "About marrying you?" "No." Elena crossed to him, taking his hands. "About whether I deserve this kind of happiness? Maybe." "You deserve everything good this world has to offer," Caleb said fiercely, "and I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to give it to you." Elena rose on her toes and kissed him softly. "I love you, Caleb Rowan. I should have said it before now, but I'm saying it now. I love you." His arms came around her, holding her close. "I love you too. More than I have words for." They stood like that for a long time, wrapped in each other, and the quiet certainty of what tomorrow would bring. Saturday dawned cold and clear, the kind of December day where the sky stretched endlessly blue and the frost sparkled like diamonds on every surface. Elena woke early, too excited to sleep, and found Mia already awake and bouncing on the bed. "It's wedding day, Mama! It's wedding day!" They dressed together, helping each other with buttons and ribbons, braiding Mia's hair and pinning up Elena's in a simple twist. When Elena finally looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked happy. Actually, genuinely happy. A knock at the door revealed Ben dressed in his Sunday best, looking uncomfortable in a starched collar. "Ma'am, everyone's ready when you are." Elena took a deep breath, squeezed Mia's hand, and nodded. "We're ready." They walked to the barn together, Mia clutching her doll bouquet, Elena's heart hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears. The barn doors opened and Elena's breath caught. Every surface glowed with lamplight, warm and golden. The ranch hands stood along one side, cleaned up and grinning. And at the far end, beneath a garland of dried wildflowers, stood Caleb. He'd shaved, combed his hair, put on what was clearly his best shirt. But what made Elena's heart swell was the expression on his face when he saw her. Pure, unfiltered joy mixed with something that looked like wonder. She walked toward him, Mia skipping ahead, and when she reached him, he took her hands like they were the most precious things he'd ever held. "You're beautiful," he whispered. "So are you," Elena whispered back, and meant it with every fiber of her being. Ben cleared his throat and opened a worn Bible. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Caleb Rowan and Elena Hart in holy matrimony." The ceremony was brief and simple, no flowery language or elaborate promises, just honest vows spoken in steady voices. "Do you, Caleb Rowan, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, till death do you part?" "I do," Caleb said, his eyes never leaving Elena's face. "And do you, Elena Hart, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, till death do you part?" "I do," Elena said, her voice strong and sure. "Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Caleb, you may kiss your bride." Caleb cupped Elena's face in his hands and kissed her gently, reverently, like she was a gift he'd never expected to receive. The ranch hands cheered, Mia clapped delightedly, and Elena felt something that had been broken inside her finally heal. They were married. They were family. They were home. The celebration afterward was exactly what Elena had hoped for, warm and loud and filled with laughter. They ate until they couldn't move, danced to James's enthusiastic fiddling, toasted with the good whiskey Carter had been saving for a special occasion. Mia stayed up far past her bedtime, dancing with each of the ranch hands in turn, her face flushed with joy. When she finally crashed, Caleb carried her to bed, tucking her in with a gentleness that made Elena's eyes sting. "Sleep well, little one," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "You did good today." "I got a papa now," Mia mumbled, already half asleep. "A real papa." Caleb's breath hitched, but he managed to keep his voice steady. "Yeah, sweetheart, you do." By the time he returned to the barn, the ranch hands had tactfully disappeared, leaving Elena alone with the remnants of the celebration. "They all said good night," she explained, suddenly nervous now that they were alone. "Went back to the bunkhouse." "Good." Caleb crossed to her, pulling her into his arms. "Because I want my wife all to myself." The word wife sent a thrill through Elena that she felt down to her toes. She wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him, deeper this time, with promise and want, and the knowledge that they had all the time in the world. "Take me inside," she whispered against his lips. "Take me home." Caleb swept her into his arms, carrying her across the threshold of the house like they were characters in one of Mia's fairy tales. He set her down gently in the bedroom. His bedroom now, theirs, and kissed her again, slower, savoring every moment. "I love you," he said against her hair. "I'm going to say that every day for the rest of our lives until you get sick of hearing it." "I'll never get sick of hearing it," Elena promised, her fingers working the buttons of his shirt. "And I'll say it right back. Every single day." They made love slowly, tenderly, learning each other's bodies and hearts with patience and care. And afterward, wrapped in each other's arms in the darkness, Elena felt peace settle over her like a blanket. She'd chosen hope over fear. She'd chosen love over safety, and it had brought her here, to this moment, to this man, to this life she'd never dared to dream possible. But their peace lasted exactly 4 days. On Wednesday morning, a wagon rolled up to the house carrying Mrs. Calloway, Reverend Michaels, and 3 women Elena recognized from the church committee. Their faces were set in expressions of grim determination that made Elena's stomach drop. Caleb was out mending fence with the hands, and Mia was playing in the barn. Elena was alone when they knocked. "Mrs. Hart," Mrs. Calloway said when Elena opened the door. Then she corrected herself with visible distaste. "Mrs. Rowan, I suppose. What can I do for you?" Elena kept her voice level despite her hammering heart. "We've come to collect the child," Mrs. Calloway announced. Elena's blood turned to ice. "I beg your pardon?" Reverend Michaels stepped forward, his expression pained but resolute. Mrs. Rowan, the church council has voted. We believe Mia would be better served in a more stable environment until certain matters can be resolved. Matters? Elena's voice was shaking now. What matters? We're married? There's no scandal. A marriage performed by a ranch hand with no legal authority? One of the church women spoke up, her tone sharp. That hardly qualifies as legitimate. The world tilted beneath Elena's feet. What? Ben Pritchard is not an ordained minister, Mrs. Calloway said with evident satisfaction, which means your ceremony has no legal standing, which means you are still living in sin with a man who is not your husband. That's not true. But even as Elena said it, doubt crept in. Ben had said he used to be a lay minister. Used to be. Had he ever been officially ordained? Had any of them checked? We've consulted with the county clerk, Reverend Michaels said quietly. The marriage is not valid. And given the circumstances, we believe it's in Mia's best interest to be placed in temporary care with a proper family while this situation is rectified. You're not taking my daughter. Elena's voice came out low and dangerous. Get off this property, now. Mrs. Rowan, we have the legal authority. Mrs. Calloway started to pull papers from her bag. I don't care what papers you have. You're not touching my child. Elena slammed the door in their faces and ran for the barn, her heart in her throat. She found Mia exactly where she'd left her, playing with a litter of barn kittens, completely oblivious to the threat descending on them. Mia, sweetheart, I need you to come with me right now. Something in Elena's voice made Mia scramble to her feet immediately. Mama? What's wrong? Nothing, baby. We just need to go for a ride. Can you be very brave and very quiet? Mia nodded, her eyes wide with fear. Elena grabbed her daughter's hand and headed for the back of the barn, where Caleb kept 2 horses already saddled for quick work. She'd never been a confident rider, but desperation made her capable of anything. She was lifting Mia onto the horse when Caleb appeared, running from the far field, his face white with fury. Elena, don't! But she was already mounting, pulling Mia tight against her, kicking the horse into motion. Mama, where are we going? Mia cried. Somewhere safe, Elena said, though she had no idea where that could possibly be. Somewhere they can't find us. Behind them, she heard shouting, heard Caleb yelling her name, heard the wagon starting to give chase. And Elena rode harder, toward the mountains, toward anywhere that wasn't here, her daughter clutching her waist and her heart breaking with every thundering hoofbeat. She'd thought she could choose hope. She'd thought love was enough. But the world had just proven her wrong. The horse's hooves pounded against frozen ground, each impact jarring Elena's spine, but she held Mia tighter and didn't slow. Behind them, she could hear the wagon, hear Caleb's voice cutting through the winter air, but fear drove her forward into the pine forest that climbed toward the mountains. She didn't have a plan, didn't know where she was going, only knew that she couldn't let them take Mia, couldn't let those righteous strangers rip her daughter away under the guise of protection. Mama, I'm scared. Mia's voice was muffled against Elena's coat. I know, baby. Hold on tight. Just hold on. The forest thickened around them, branches whipping past, the path growing narrower and rougher. The horse stumbled on a root, and Elena nearly lost her seat, her lack of riding skill showing dangerously. And then, suddenly, Caleb was there. He'd ridden hard and fast, taking a shortcut through terrain Elena hadn't known existed. And now he blocked the path ahead, his horse breathing hard, his face etched with desperate concern. Elena, stop! He shouted. Please, just stop! Elena pulled the reins, the horse dancing nervously beneath her. She was shaking so hard she could barely keep her grip. I can't let them take her, she said, her voice breaking. I won't. Caleb dismounted and approached slowly, hands raised like he was gentling a spooked animal. No one's taking anyone, I promise you, but running isn't the answer. They have legal papers, Caleb. They said our marriage isn't real. They said... Elena couldn't continue, couldn't voice the horror of what they'd threatened. I know what they said. Caleb's jaw was tight with barely controlled rage. And they're wrong about all of it. Ben wasn't ordained. The marriage isn't legal. That doesn't matter. Caleb reached the horse, placed a gentle hand on Elena's leg. Elena, look at me. Please. She did, and saw certainty blazing in his eyes. "We'll fix this," he said firmly. "We'll go to the county clerk, get properly married by someone with actual authority, file whatever papers they need. We'll make it so legal that no one can question it. But running into the mountains with winter coming and no supplies? That's how people die, Elena. That's how you lose everything." "I've already lost everything once," Elena whispered. "I can't go through that again. I can't lose her." "You won't. I swear to you on everything I have, you won't." Caleb's hand moved to cover hers on the reins. "But you have to trust me. Trust that we can fight this the right way. Together." Mia lifted her head from Elena's coat. "Mr. Rowan, are the bad people going to take me away?" The raw fear in that small voice seemed to break something in Caleb. He reached up and lifted Mia from the horse, holding her close. "No, sweetheart. No one's taking you anywhere. Your mama and I are going to make sure of that." He looked at Elena over Mia's head. "But we have to be smart about it. Running makes us look guilty of something we haven't done." Elena closed her eyes, feeling the adrenaline start to drain away, leaving exhaustion and terror in its wake. He was right. She knew he was right, but the fear was so overwhelming, so consuming, that rational thought seemed impossible. "What if they don't care about legal papers?" she asked, her voice small. "What if they've already decided we're unfit and nothing we do will change their minds? Then we'll get a real judge involved, a real lawyer. We'll fight this in court if we have to." Caleb's voice was steel wrapped in velvet. "Elena, I have money, more than the town knows. I've been saving for years with nothing to spend it on. We can hire the best lawyer in the territory if that's what it takes." Elena stared at him. This man who'd already given her so much and was now offering to spend everything he had to protect them. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do all that?" Caleb's expression softened. "Because you're my family. Both of you. And I protect what's mine." The simple declaration undid her completely. Elena dismounted on shaking legs and let Caleb pull her into his arms, Mia sandwiched between them, all three of them holding on like they could keep the world at bay through sheer force of will. "I'm sorry," Elena said against his chest. "I'm sorry I ran. I panicked." "I know, but we're going to handle this the right way." Caleb pressed a kiss to her hair. "Starting with going back to the ranch and sending those people packing. And then we're riding straight to the county seat and getting married so thoroughly legal that no one can ever question it again." They rode back together, Caleb leading Elena's horse while Mia sat secure in front of him. By the time they emerged from the forest, the church delegation's wagon was gone, but Ben and the other ranch hands were gathered in a tight, angry cluster near the barn. Ben approached as they dismounted, his weathered face twisted with guilt. "Boss, I'm so sorry. I was a lay minister back in Kentucky, did weddings and baptisms for years. I didn't know it didn't carry over when I moved west. I never meant to—" "It's not your fault," Caleb said firmly. "You did what you knew how to do. This is on them for looking for any excuse to cause trouble." "What did they say when you sent them away?" Elena asked. "Said they'd be back with the sheriff if we didn't cooperate," Carter reported, his young face furious. "Said it was for the child's own good." "They've got 3 days to get their affairs in order," James added. "That's what Mrs. Calloway told us. 3 days, then they're coming back with legal force." 3 days. Elena felt the fear trying to claw its way back up her throat, but Caleb's hand found hers and squeezed. "Then we have 3 days to make this right," he said. "Ben, saddle 2 fresh horses. Elena and I are riding to Silver Creek. There's a circuit judge there who owes me a favor. We'll be married by sundown today." "What about Mia?" Elena asked. "I'll watch her," Ben said immediately. "Me and the boys. We won't let her out of our sight." Mia looked between the adults, reading the tension. "Mama? Are you leaving?" Elena knelt in front of her daughter, smoothing her curls. "Just for today, sweetheart. Mr. Rowan and I need to go do some very important paperwork so that we're married in a way that everyone has to accept. But we'll be back tonight. I promise." "And then the bad people can't take me?" "That's right. Then they can't take you." Mia considered this, then nodded with a child's faith in parental promises. "Okay, but you have to come back." "Wild horses couldn't keep me away," Elena said, pulling her close. "I love you, baby." "Love you too, Mama." Caleb knelt beside them. Mia, I need you to be very brave today. Can you do that? I'm always brave, Mia declared, lifting her chin. I know you are. Caleb's smile was genuine despite the circumstances. That's one of the things I love about you. Mia threw her arms around his neck, and Elena saw Caleb's eyes close, saw him hold her daughter like she was precious beyond measure. 20 minutes later, they were riding hard toward Silver Creek, the horses fresh and strong beneath them. The town was a 4-hour ride in good weather, longer with winter setting in, but Caleb pushed the pace as much as he dared. Elena's legs ached from riding, her back protesting every jolt, but she gritted her teeth and kept up. This was too important to slow down for discomfort. They didn't talk much during the ride. There was too much to say and not enough breath to spare while pushing the horses. But Caleb's presence beside her was steady, an anchor in the storm. Silver Creek appeared on the horizon as the sun began its descent toward the mountains. It was larger than Ridgefield, more prosperous, with actual storefronts and a proper courthouse instead of just a church that doubled for civic matters. Caleb led them straight to a modest house on the edge of town and dismounted, helping Elena down. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground, stiff from hours in the saddle. Judge Warren, Caleb explained, knocking firmly on the door. He's fair, and he doesn't put up with nonsense from busybody church committees. The door opened to reveal a compact man with iron gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He looked at Caleb, then at Elena, and understanding dawned on his face. Rowan, didn't expect to see you in these parts. Need a favor, Judge. A big one. Judge Warren stepped aside. Come in. Tell me what kind of trouble you've gotten yourself into. They sat in his study while Caleb explained. The wedding performed by Ben, the church committee's claims of invalidity, the threat to take Mia away. The judge listened without interruption, his expression growing darker with each detail. When Caleb finished, Judge Warren leaned back in his chair and studied them both. You love this woman? He asked Caleb bluntly. With everything I have. And you love him? Elena met the judge's gaze steadily. Yes, more than I knew I could love anyone again. And the child? She's yours from a previous marriage? Yes, her father died 2 years ago. Judge Warren nodded slowly. Mrs. Hart, or whatever you're calling yourself at the moment, what those people are trying to do is legal harassment at best, kidnapping at worst. Ben Pritchard's ceremony might not hold up in court, but the fact remains that you're a widow with full custody of your child, and no court in this territory would remove that child from a stable home without evidence of actual neglect or danger. Hope flared in Elena's chest. So they can't take her? Not legally, but that doesn't mean they won't try, especially if they can paint a picture of impropriety that sways public opinion enough to pressure a judge. He stood, moving to a cabinet and pulling out an official-looking ledger. So we're going to eliminate any possibility of impropriety right now. I'll marry you myself, file the paperwork immediately, and provide you with documentation so thorough that the Ridgefield Church Committee will have to crawl back under whatever rock they came from. Thank you, Elena breathed. Don't thank me yet. You'll need more than just a marriage certificate to shut these people up permanently. Judge Warren pulled out paper and pen. You'll need a lawyer, a good one, someone who can file an injunction if they try anything, and who can make it very clear that harassment of you or your family will result in legal consequences they won't enjoy. I can pay, Caleb said, whatever it costs. I know you can. You've got that ranch free and clear, no debt, more cattle than most men see in a lifetime. The question is whether you're willing to make this public, because once you bring a lawyer in, once you fight back officially, everyone's going to know your business. Caleb looked at Elena. What do you think? Elena thought about spending the rest of her life looking over her shoulder, waiting for the next delegation, the next threat. Thought about Mia growing up with that fear hanging over her. I think I'm tired of hiding, she said quietly. I think it's time we stood up and showed them we're not ashamed of anything we've done. Caleb's smile was fierce and proud. Then we fight. Good, Judge Warren said briskly. Then let's get you married first. I'm assuming you want this done quickly. As fast as legally possible, Caleb confirmed. The ceremony took exactly 7 minutes. Judge Warren's wife served as witness, a kind woman who congratulated them warmly and didn't ask prying questions. Elena repeated vows for the second time in less than a week, but these felt different, weighted with legal authority, protected by official sanction. When Judge Warren pronounced them husband and wife, Caleb kissed Elena with gentle reverence, and she felt a piece of the fear that had been choking her finally ease. "You're legally married now," Judge Warren said, signing the certificate with a flourish. "I'll file this with the county clerk first thing tomorrow morning. In the meantime, take this copy with you. And take this." He handed Caleb a business card. "That's Samuel Brooks, best lawyer in 3 territories. Tell him I sent you and explain the situation. He'll know what to do." Caleb shook the judge's hand firmly. "I owe you for this. You saved my ranch from bankruptcy 5 years ago when you bought my cattle at fair price when everyone else was offering pennies. We'll call it even." Judge Warren turned to Elena. "Mrs. Rowan, don't let those small-minded people make you feel like you've done something wrong. You're a mother protecting her child and a woman choosing her own happiness. There's nothing shameful in that." Elena's throat was too tight to speak, so she just nodded. They rode back toward the ranch as night fell, the marriage certificate tucked safely in Caleb's coat. Elena was exhausted, her body aching from hours of riding, but her mind was clearer than it had been in days. "We're really married now," she said into the darkness. "We were really married before," Caleb replied. "This just makes it official to people who need paperwork to believe in anything. Still, it feels different, more solid." "Good different?" "Very good different." Elena glanced at him, his profile barely visible in the starlight. "Thank you for fighting for us, for not giving up when it would have been easier. Easier isn't always better, and you and Mia are worth every fight." Caleb reached over and took her hand. "We're going to win this, Elena. I promise you." They arrived back at the ranch well past midnight, exhausted and saddle-sore but victorious. Ben met them at the barn, relief flooding his face. "She's asleep," he reported. "Been asking for you every hour, but she finally went down about an hour ago. Didn't give us a bit of trouble otherwise." "Thank you," Elena said fervently, "for taking care of her." "Ma'am, after what you've done for us, it's the least we could do." Ben studied them both. "You get it sorted?" "We're legally married," Caleb confirmed, "and we've got a plan for handling the church committee when they come back." "What kind of plan?" "The kind that involves a very expensive lawyer and a willingness to make Ridgefield regret ever threatening us." Ben's grin was wolfish. "I like this plan." Elena went straight to check on Mia, finding her daughter curled under the quilt, her doll clutched tight. She pressed a kiss to Mia's forehead and whispered, "We're back, baby. You're safe." Mia didn't wake, but she smiled in her sleep, and Elena felt her heart settle. The next morning, Caleb rode to Silver Creek again, this time to meet with Samuel Brooks. He returned late in the afternoon with news that made Elena weak with relief. "Brooks took the case," Caleb announced, striding into the kitchen where Elena was making supper. "He's filing an injunction tomorrow morning prohibiting the church committee from any attempt to remove Mia from our custody without a formal court hearing. And he's drafting a letter to Reverend Michaels making it very clear that any further harassment will result in a lawsuit for defamation and emotional distress." "Can he really do that?" Elena asked, hardly daring to hope. "He can, and he will. Brooks has a reputation for destroying people who try to use religion as an excuse for cruelty. He says cases like ours make him furious because they give actual faith a bad name." Caleb pulled Elena into his arms. "He also said that based on what I told him, we have grounds for a countersuit if they don't back down. Harassment, attempted kidnapping, slander. He rattled off about 6 different charges he could make stick." "I don't want to destroy them," Elena said quietly. "I just want them to leave us alone." "And they will. Brooks is going to make sure of it." True to his word, 3 days later when Mrs. Calloway and the church committee returned, this time with the county sheriff in tow. They found Samuel Brooks waiting for them with a stack of legal documents and an expression that could have frozen fire. Elena watched from the house window as Brooks intercepted them before they could even reach the porch. She couldn't hear what was being said, but she saw Mrs. Calloway's face go from confident to outraged to pale in the span of 5 minutes. The sheriff read one of the documents, looked at Mrs. Calloway with something like disgust, and got back in his wagon. The rest of the delegation followed shortly after, their postures defeated. Brooks approached the house, his satisfied smile telling Elena everything she needed to know. "They won't be bothering you again," he said simply. "I made it very clear that any further attempts to interfere with your family would result in legal action they couldn't afford. The sheriff confirmed that you have sole legal custody of Mia, that your marriage is valid and properly filed, and that there are no grounds whatsoever for removal of the child." Elena's knees went weak. "It's really over? The immediate threat?" "Yes. But Mrs. Rowan, I'd like to suggest one more thing." Brooks pulled out another document. "I'd like to file adoption papers for Mr. Rowan to legally adopt Mia. It would provide an additional layer of protection and make your family's status absolutely unassailable." Elena looked at Caleb, who had come to stand beside her. "Is that something you want?" Caleb's voice was rough with emotion. "More than anything, if Elena agrees and if Mia agrees." They asked Mia that evening, the three of them sitting together at the kitchen table. Elena explained carefully what adoption meant, how it would make Caleb legally her father in the eyes of the law. Mia listened with the seriousness the moment deserved, then looked at Caleb with those big trusting eyes. "Will I call you Papa?" Caleb's breath caught. "Only if you want to." Mia considered this, then nodded decisively. "Okay, you can be my Papa, because you take care of us and you make Mama happy and you build really good forts." Caleb laughed, the sound choked with tears, and pulled both of them into his arms. "I love you, Mia, so much." "I love you too, Papa." Elena cried into Caleb's shoulder while Mia patted her back consolingly, and for the first time since Thomas died, Elena felt like her family was whole again. The adoption papers were filed within the week. Samuel Brooks handled everything with efficient precision, and within a month it was official: Mia Rowan, daughter of Caleb and Elena Rowan. The church committee never returned. Word spread through Ridgefield about the legal threats, and suddenly people who'd been so eager to judge found other things to occupy their time. A few even approached Elena at the market the next time she ventured into town, offering awkward apologies that she accepted with grace she didn't entirely feel. Winter deepened, and with it came a peace Elena had never expected to find. The ranch settled into comfortable rhythms, Caleb working the land, Elena cooking and keeping house, Mia growing bold and bright and secure in the knowledge that she was loved. Christmas approached again, 1 year after Elena had stood in that cold market believing she had nothing left to lose. This time, when she baked pies, it was for family. For ranch hands who'd become brothers. For a husband who tasted her cooking like it was sacred. For a daughter who helped roll dough and lick spoons and filled the kitchen with laughter. On Christmas Eve, they gathered in the barn, the same barn where they'd been married twice, once in love and once in law. The ranch hands had decorated it again, this time with pine boughs and ribbons that Mia had helped arrange. They ate together, all of them, passing dishes and sharing stories and creating the kind of memories that would sustain them through harder times when they came. After dinner, Caleb pulled Elena aside while Mia was distracted by the kittens that had grown into cats. "I have something for you," he said, pulling out a small wrapped package. Elena opened it to find a recipe box, beautifully carved from cedar, with her initials engraved on the top. "For all the recipes you're going to create," Caleb explained, "so our grandchildren can taste the same pies that brought us together." Elena's throat tightened. "It's perfect." "Look inside." She opened the box and found a single card, written in Caleb's careful hand. Elena's first pie, the one that tasted like home and changed everything. "I thought you should remember where it all started," Caleb said softly. "That day in the market, when Mia made me try your cookie. When I realized that good things still existed in the world, and maybe I deserved to reach for them." Elena set the box down carefully and wrapped her arms around her husband's neck. "I love you, Caleb Rowan. Thank you for being brave enough to reach. Thank you for being brave enough to let me catch you." They kissed while snow began to fall outside, gentle and quiet, covering the ranch in clean white. Mia found them a moment later and wedged herself between them, demanding to know what was in the box. They showed her, explained it, and watched as she insisted on adding her own card. "Mia's best cookies. For Papa, who said they were perfect." Caleb picked up his daughter and held her close, and Elena leaned into both of them, breathing in the scent of pine and wood smoke and home. 1 year ago, she'd been desperate and alone, measuring her worth by how invisible she could make herself. Now she stood in a barn decorated for Christmas, surrounded by people who saw her, really saw her, and loved what they found. She'd lost everything once and thought she'd never recover. But she'd been wrong, because sometimes losing everything just meant you had room to find something better. Spring came to the ranch with wildflowers and new calves and Mia's 6th birthday. They celebrated with cake and presents and a new dress that didn't come from charity, but from parents who could afford to give their daughter pretty things. Elena's kitchen garden flourished, her pies became legendary among the neighboring ranches, and Caleb started getting orders from as far as 3 towns away. "You could open a bakery," he suggested one evening while they sat on the porch watching the sunset. Elena considered it. "Maybe someday, but right now, I like cooking just for us. For family." "Family," Caleb repeated, tasting the word. "You know, a year ago I didn't have one of those." "Now you do." Elena took his hand. "And it's only going to get bigger." Caleb looked at her sharply. "Are you saying—" "I'm 3 months along." Elena smiled at his thunderstruck expression. "I wanted to be sure before I told you." Caleb stood abruptly, pulling her into his arms, his face buried in her hair. She felt him shaking, felt the dampness of tears against her neck. "A baby," he whispered. "We're having a baby." "We are." "I never thought, after Sarah, I never let myself hope." "Hope anyway," Elena said gently. "Hope for good things. Hope for a future that doesn't hurt. Hope for all of it." When they told Mia, she demanded to know if she could name the baby. They negotiated. She could suggest names, but final decision would be made by all 3 of them together. Mia took this responsibility with utmost seriousness, compiling lists and crossing out options and lobbying for her favorites with the persistence of a seasoned politician. The baby arrived in early winter, a healthy boy with Caleb's dark hair and Elena's eyes. They named him Thomas Caleb Rowan, honoring both the past and the present, the love that had been lost and the love that had been found. Mia was beside herself with joy, declaring herself the best big sister in the entire territory and proving it by helping with every feeding and diaper change with cheerful dedication. The church committee sent a christening gift, a white blanket with the baby's name embroidered on it. The accompanying note was stiff but polite, congratulating them on their growing family. Elena accepted it with grace and tucked the blanket away, choosing instead to wrap her son in the quilt that had covered Mia in their first cold nights at the ranch, the one that had witnessed their transformation from desperate strangers to beloved family. Years passed. The ranch prospered. Mia grew into a bright, confident girl who could ride as well as any of the ranch hands and who inherited her mother's gift for baking. Thomas became a sturdy boy who followed his father everywhere, learning the land with the patience of someone who knew it would one day be his. Elena's hair started to show silver at the temples, and Caleb's moved from iron to white, but their love only deepened, settling into the comfortable certainty of people who'd chosen each other not just once, but every day. They had more children, 2 more daughters who filled the house with noise and laughter and kept everyone on their toes. They expanded the ranch, hired more hands, built a larger barn, and a proper chicken coop and a smokehouse for Elena's ever-growing culinary ambitions. And every Christmas, without fail, Elena made pies. Apple, berry, spiced pumpkin, the same ones that had brought Caleb to her table that first day. She'd made hundreds over the years, thousands probably, but they never lost their meaning, because they weren't just pies. They were promises kept. Second chances given. Hope chosen over fear. They were home, baked into golden crusts and served with love. On the 20th anniversary of the day they met, Caleb found Elena in the kitchen making pies for that year's Christmas market. The ranch donated them now, sending them to families who needed help, who knew what it felt like to be invisible and desperate. Caleb wrapped his arms around his wife from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Still tastes like home," he murmured. Elena leaned back against him, her hands stilling on the dough. "Still feels like home." "Good." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Because this is exactly where we belong." And it was. After all the loss and fear, all the judgment and struggle, all the moments when giving up seemed easier than holding on, they'd found exactly where they belonged. Not in the absence of hardship, but in the presence of love. Not in perfection, but in choosing each other, imperfect and real and absolutely worth fighting for. Elena looked around her kitchen, at the recipe box overflowing with cards, at the photographs of their growing family on the walls, at the window that looked out over land they'd built into something lasting, and smiled. They'd started with a pie and a promise. They'd built a life worth living. And when she tasted the filling from the spoon, checking the sweetness, she understood what Caleb had known from that very first bite all those years ago. It tasted like home. And home, it turned out, was the most precious thing they'd ever found.